Today, I'm going to be telling you about two different true crime cases that are connected by a single theme. These are stories that start out with seemingly wholesome beginnings, only to take incredibly dark turns. As always, my name is Nigel, and welcome back to Crime Zone. A reminder, if you find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories told with a mysterious and suspenseful vibe. Also, this is actually a recurring series we've been doing on the channel, so if you're interested in these types of cases and haven't seen the first two videos in this collection, be sure to check those out next. Stick around for this one first, though, because I have to say, the twists in today's stories are some of the darkest we've ever come across. With that out of the way, let's dive in. In 2021, Vyacheslov Matrosov and Oleg Sviridov were the best of friends. The men were both from the Russian town of Pribrizhny, a small locality of roughly 11,000 people in the country's southwest, about 130 miles from the border with Kazakhstan. Reports don't mention exactly when or where the men first met, but according to pretty much every source we were able to find, they had been extremely close for many years. Even though they were both now in their 30s and had separate lives and responsibilities, Oleg and Slava, which was Vyacheslav's nickname, still spent as much time together as they could. Slava was definitely the more successful of the pair. He had a job at a factory that made rocket engines and was known as a very dependable and hard worker. He was also married, and he and his wife Natalia had two young daughters. Oleg, on the other hand, didn't really have formal employment. He would do odd jobs around town and sometimes made ends meet by collecting and selling scrap metal. He was also nowhere near as successful in his relationships. For quite a while, he was living with a long-term girlfriend named Oksana and her daughter, but that had ended around the beginning of the year. As a result, Oleg was kind of known around town as a loser, someone who didn't really have his life together and who spent most of his time drinking. I should say, Pribrizhny is decently far into the Russian interior and is kind of in the middle of nowhere, so it's doubtful that there's really much else to do there other than drink. But the point is, a lot of people judged him. Anyway, Slava wasn't like that, though. He really enjoyed Oleg's company, and the pair spent the vast majority of their free time together. Mostly, that meant hanging out and drinking, but as best friends, the two of them were also there for whatever the other needed. You know, when Oleg broke up with Oksana, Slava was there to help him move back into his mother's place. And anytime Slava and Natalia needed a night away from the kids, Oleg always agreed to help out as a babysitter. To give you an idea of just how integrated the family's lives were, Slava and Natalia had asked Oleg to be one of their daughter's godfathers, which he graciously accepted. For all of these reasons and more, basically everyone expected Slava and Oleg's friendship to last a lifetime. And technically, that would be true for one of them. You see, at the end of that summer, something would happen. Something that would cause this small Russian town to make international headlines and would shake its residents to their very cores. On the night of August 25th, 2021, Slava and Oleg met up for one of their usual hangouts. Slava had this big wardrobe that he needed to move, so he asked Oleg to come over to his house and help him out. The job didn't take that long, but it didn't matter because mostly it was just an excuse to get together. And predictably, pretty soon the men were congratulating themselves with a few celebratory drinks. This particular evening, Oleg got a little more carried away than usual. After a while, he got too drunk even for conversation and started just browsing on his phone. Not long after, he passed out on the couch altogether. Now, this sort of annoyed Slava, not just because Oleg had fallen asleep on him, but because his friend had spent all that time on his phone, and he realized he hadn't even sent him the pictures that he had promised. There were a few photos that Oleg had taken during a recent trip they were on, and Slava had asked him to send them over. Since the night was basically done, Slava figured he'd grab the phone and just do it himself before heading off to bed. Just a couple minutes later, though, neighbors of Slava's would be startled by screaming and shouting and loud banging noises that were coming from his family's house. A few of them ran over to see what was going on, only to find Slava and Oleg in the middle of a fight. The neighbors could immediately tell that this wasn't like some drunken disagreement. The men were attacking each other. and Slava was holding a knife in one of his hands. The neighbors intervened, and they managed to break the men up before things escalated further. As soon as they did, Oleg bolted out the door and took off into the night as fast as he could. Now, Slava would eventually calm down, but when morning came, he would not go to work as usual. Instead, straight away, he went down to the local police station. He told officers there that he had something that he needed to report. As he explained the situation, he also handed over Oleg's cell phone. Oleg had left it behind when he ran away the previous night. Upon listening to everything that Slava had to say, police agreed that they would begin an investigation. But before they could really do anything else, authorities needed to track Oleg down. Over the next few days, they would search for him extensively, but they were unable to find him. He was not at his mother's house, he wasn't in any of the usual spots that he hung out, and aside from a couple of sightings that couldn't be confirmed, no one really had any idea where he was. Investigators began to think that he had left the area altogether. That was until about a week later, when Slava made a second visit to the police station. When he did, he said, "I have something to tell you, and I have something to show you." On September 2nd, police accompanied Slava to a remote section of forest on the outskirts of Vintai, an even smaller town than Pribrezhny, located a couple of miles away. When they got there, Slava led them into the woods, specifically to a muddy area in the middle of a clearing. That's where he showed officers a section of the ground that had recently been disturbed. It was a shallow grave, and buried inside was the body of Oleg Sviridov. So it turned out that on the night of August 25th, as Slava was scrolling through Oleg's phone looking for those photos, he had come across a video. The video looked a bit strange, so out of curiosity, he had clicked on it. What he saw made him absolutely sick to his stomach. The video in question was of Oleg sexually abusing a young girl. Not just any young girl, though. It was one of Slava's 9-year-old daughters. The same daughters that Oleg had been babysitting and taking care of for years. In the horrifying and disgusting footage, the girl could reportedly be heard saying at one point, quote, "Oleg, that's enough. I can't take it anymore. I want to go home." As I'm sure you can imagine, Slava's first reaction to seeing this was complete and utter disbelief, followed by blind rage. He instantly grabbed Oleg and began shaking him awake, demanding to know what was going on. Of course, there was nothing that Oleg could say, no excuse that would ever justify this. So instead, he began trying to run while Slava attacked him. Because the neighbors didn't know what was going on, when they intervened, Oleg had managed to get away. When Slava turned over the cell phone to police, things got even worse, because it quickly became clear that his daughter was not the only victim. He had also abused the daughter of his former partner, Oksana. Oksana had no idea about any of this until Slava uncovered it, but the girl confirmed what had happened when she was asked about it. According to reports, both she and Slava's daughter were victimized by Oleg from the time that they were just 6 years old. They had never said anything because he had threatened them. Some Russian media sources state that there were other victims as well, though we were unable to find much more information about this. So, as I said, police launched their investigation, but what they didn't know is that at the same time, Slava started a search for Oleg on his own. And since they had been so close, he was quickly able to figure out where his former best friend was hiding. When Slava found Oleg, he marched him into the middle of the woods at knife point, right to that same spot where he would later bring police. Once there, he threw him a shovel and told him to dig his own grave. Now, we can never truly know what happened from here, but what Slava told police is that once Oleg finished digging the shallow grave, he gave him an ultimatum. He could turn himself in to authorities, or this would be where things ended for him. He said that once again Oleg tried to fight him, and that during the resulting scuffle, he had ended up fatally stabbing himself. He claimed that he did not kill Oleg, rather he had only buried his body once he was already dead. Like I said, we can never really know what the truth was here. But based on the knife injuries to Oleg's body, police had a hard time believing Slava's story. As a result, he was arrested on suspicion of murder. If convicted, Slava would have been facing 15 years in prison. However, that quickly changed once the Russian public got word of the entire context behind the story. The outcry that followed in support of Slava was substantial. The response locally was even greater. Community members rallied behind him and his family, pooling money for his legal defense. By early 2022, justice officials had reversed course. They now said that they had uncovered evidence revealing that Oleg Sviridov's wounds were indeed self-inflicted. As a result, instead of being prosecuted for murder, Slava would now face the less serious offense of inciting a person to take their own life. Now, I'll admit that this could totally have been based on legitimate new developments, but given the timing, it sounds a little fishy. It kind of feels like authorities agreed with the public sentiment, which is that Slava's actions were totally understandable, but that they didn't want to come out and outright openly co-sign vigilante justice. Again, pure speculation on my part, though. Slava was ultimately sentenced to 18 months in a Russian penal colony. Sources contradict each other, but he would end up serving between 6 and 12 months before being released. Upon his return home, he posted a photo of himself and his wife, expressing his gratitude towards all the people who had supported him and his family. Of course, there are definitely those who believe that even a single day spent behind bars was too much for what Slava did. Many argued that, if anything, he had protected them from Oleg causing further harm to other young victims. Regardless of your take on the matter, one thing is for sure. This is one of those stories that makes you question whether you can ever really trust anyone. In early 2024, 27-year-old Margarita Razaz was feeling hopeful for the first time in a while. The last couple of years had been very rough and had been filled with a lot of loss. You see, Margarita was originally from Ukraine, specifically from Kharkiv. For those unfamiliar, Kharkiv is in the northeast of the country, and it was one of the earliest and hardest hit regions during the 2022 Russian invasion. Now, Margarita was lucky enough to be one of those who was able to escape the fighting. She, along with her 51-year-old mother, Maryna Stetsenko, had first fled to Slovakia before eventually they were accepted as refugees in Germany. It had been a long road to get there, both figuratively and literally. By the time everything went through and they were settled, it was December of 2023, almost 2 full years after the invasion began. Still, over the past few months, things had really started looking up. Margarita and Maryna had been provided accommodations at a refugee center in the town of Wieslach. Just for reference, that's in southwestern Germany, about 60 miles south of Frankfurt. Anyway, while it was obviously difficult for the mother and daughter to be in this completely new place where everyone spoke a language they didn't understand, they were immediately struck by just how warmly they were embraced by the German people. It wasn't just the volunteers and staff who were working at the refugee center either. Ordinary people were going out of their way to help them and make them feel welcome as well. Because of this, in a short period of time, Margarita and Maryna felt like they were beginning to find their footing in their new home. As I'm sure you can imagine, this came as a huge relief. But there was also another reason that it brought comfort to the women. Margarita was actually several months pregnant with her first child when she got to Germany, and the baby was due to arrive very soon. As a result, they only had a short window to figure out how to navigate the German healthcare system. Going back to what I said before about ordinary people stepping up, this is where that help had really made a difference. While looking around online, Maryna had found a social media group that had been set up by everyday German citizens for the purposes of organizing support for Ukrainian refugees. After explaining her and her daughter's situation, Maryna was contacted through the group by a woman named Ina. Ina volunteered to serve as a translator for Maryna and Margarita, and just kind of help them generally with anything they needed when it came to dealing with the hospital and other administrative stuff related to giving birth. The mother and daughter graciously accepted, and in January of 2024, they met with Ina for the first time. The women quickly hit it off, and over the next few weeks, Ina proved to be a huge help. She went with Margarita and Maryna to every doctor's appointment and checkup, and assisted them with filling out all of the paperwork at the maternity hospital. During this time, the three got to know each other a lot better, and Ina opened up more about her own life and family. Ina and her husband Marco lived a couple of towns over in a municipality called Sandhausen. She was an office clerk, and he worked at a butcher shop, and they lived in a quiet residential area with their 3 children and their dogs. Pretty early on into their budding friendship, Ina revealed that it was actually an exciting time for her family as well. After raising 3 boys, she was pregnant with her 4th child, and she and Marco were finally going to have a little girl. This was one of the things that really reassured Margarita and Maryna that they were in good hands. Not only did Ina have a lot of experience and advice related to pregnancy and childbirth and what that looked like in Germany, but she was literally in that same place now. So in many ways, this was like a shared experience that they were all going through together. Right at the tail end of January, Margarita went into labor, and partially thanks to all the support she'd received, everything went as smoothly as it possibly could have. After giving birth to a healthy baby girl, she decided to name her Mia. Margarita and her mom were overjoyed, and as you might imagine, it was an incredibly special and precious time. Particularly because, as I mentioned before, Mia was Margarita's first child. For the next several weeks, Margarita and Maryna spent their days enjoying all of the new experiences that came with this fresh chapter of their lives. For Margarita as a new mother, and for Maryna as a new grandmother. Unfortunately, given the topic of this video, though, you and I both know that this is not where the story ends. About 5 weeks later, on March 6th, 2024, Margarita, Maryna, and baby Mia set out for what was supposed to be one of their first outings all together. They had been invited to a restaurant by Ina and her family to share a meal and celebrate her husband Marco's 44th birthday. The whole thing started off completely normal. After arriving, they all sat down together, ordered their food, and quickly got lost in friendly conversation. Obviously, with Margarita being a new mother, there was no shortage of things to talk about. However, suddenly, right during the middle of all of this, Maryna began feeling very sick. She was all woozy and dizzy, she had severe stomach pain, and she just really wasn't doing well. Now, it was immediately clear to everyone that they were going to have to cut that day's celebrations short. But Ina said Maryna's symptoms were concerning enough that she should really see a doctor. She suggested that Marco take her to the hospital. In the meantime, she offered to drive Margarita and Mia home. They all agreed, and they went their separate ways shortly after. While Margarita and the others were waiting back at the refugee center a couple of hours later, Marco showed up and told them that he had some bad news. He explained that when they got to the hospital, doctors had taken a look at Maryna and realized that she had suffered a heart attack. Marco said that it looked like everything was going to be okay, but still, Maryna had been admitted. So if they wanted to see her, he could take them over there. Of course, Margarita was worried about her mom, so she immediately bundled up baby Mia and they got into the car. But what she didn't know was that they were not on their way to the hospital. The next day, shortly before 10:30 a.m., a man in the town of Hockenheim, about 7 miles west of Wiesloch, was out getting a bit of exercise. He was on his usual morning walk along a scenic footpath that follows the Rhine River, when something caught his eye. It was lying on one of the banks of the river over by a boat launch. At first, it wasn't clear exactly what this thing was, but the man was curious enough that he decided to investigate. When he got closer, though, he was absolutely horrified. What he was looking at were the charred remnants of a woman's body. When police were called to the scene and launched an investigation, they quickly concluded that they were dealing with a murder. Though whoever was responsible had attempted to cover this up by dousing the female victim's body in gasoline and setting it on fire, there were injuries to her body that had clearly happened before, including trauma to her head. Unfortunately, reports don't appear to delve into exactly how authorities identified the body. But what we do know is that pretty soon they were able to determine that these were the remains of Margarita Razaz. What we also know is that it didn't take long for the case to get even more alarming when police learned that Margarita was a new mother, but that no one had any idea where her baby was. That would change, though, when they traced Margarita, baby Mia, and Maryna's last known movements back to the restaurant on March 6th, and more specifically to Ina and Marco, who, as it turned out, had quite the awful secret. You see, despite their friendly and seemingly selfless behavior, what the couple had been doing these past few months had never been about helping Ukrainian refugees. Instead, from the moment Ina had contacted Maryna through that social media group, she and Marco had been after one thing and one thing only: a baby girl. In fact, this was all part of a plan that had been in motion for quite some time. Police would eventually learn that as early as December of 2023, Ina and Marco had been telling people that they were going to have a little girl. This seemed like good news to a lot of people that knew them, because up until now, they had been nothing but great parents. People close to the couple were also aware that this was something Ina and Marco had wanted for a long time. They loved their 3 boys, but they had always felt their family was incomplete without a daughter. Still, for a variety of reasons, this had just never happened for them. However, in December, Marco had suddenly started telling coworkers, neighbors, and just about anyone else who would listen that he and his wife's dreams were finally coming true. Ina was pregnant, and it was a girl. They were finally going to have the little princess that they always wanted. The couple was beyond excited. Marco even showed off photos of a little pink hat that he said that they had purchased for the baby. Over the next couple of months, Marco and Ina talked more and more to those around them about their baby, until in early February they applied for a birth certificate for a home birth with the local registry office. Basically, they went and filled out paperwork stating that Ina had delivered their daughter at home and that they just needed the documents to make it official. But here's the thing. Ina was never pregnant. She and Marco just told everyone that she was, so that no one would ask questions the following month when they finally put the last bit of their plan into action. On March 6th, Ina and Marco had invited Maryna and Margarita to that birthday meal in order to lure them into a trap. When they arrived, the couple waited until they were distracted and spiked the mother and daughter's drinks with sedatives. The sedatives hit Maryna a lot harder and a lot faster, which is why it seemed like she was having a medical episode. But in reality, both of them had been drugged. They just didn't know it. While Ina took Margarita and baby Mia temporarily back home, Marco drove Maryna to a fishing pond a few miles south. Once there, he beat the defenseless 51-year-old woman to death with a hammer before dumping her body in the water. Following the murder, Marco returned with that bogus story about Maryna having a heart attack. Now feeling the effects of the drugs herself, and understandably being worried about her mother, Margarita had trusted Ina and Marco and got in the car with them. But instead of heading to the hospital, Marco drove them all to that boat launch area in Hockenheim. That's where he killed Margarita in the exact same way he did to her mother, though instead of throwing her body in the water, he doused her with gasoline and lit her on fire. While all of this happened, Ina sat in the car with Margarita's 5-week-old baby, who she and her husband now planned to keep as their own. And for a little while, that's exactly what they did. Despite committing 2 absolutely heinous murders and stealing a baby, Ina and Marco went on with their lives as if they were proud new parents. That was until a week later, when police pieced all of this together and raided their home. To the relief of everyone involved in the investigation, when the operation was carried out on March 13th, baby Mia was located physically unharmed. She was placed in the care of an emergency foster family while Ina and Marco were arrested. Maryna's body was ultimately recovered from the water on March 19th following an extensive search. Her remains were located in part thanks to cell phone data. Ina and Marco were charged with 2 counts of murder, and their trial actually just ended earlier this month at the time of this recording, in February of 2025. During the proceedings, the couple were apparently both quite remorseful for what they'd done and offered full confessions. Ina, in particular, stated that she realized that she had not only left Mia without a mother, but in some ways, her own children as well. At the end of the trial, Ina and Marco were both sentenced to life in prison. German news sources also specifically pointed out that unlike in most cases, the court has already said that they will not be eligible for parole after the usual 15 years. As for baby Mia, she now lives with her aunt, Margarita's sister, and Marina's other daughter, Eugenia. After learning about her mother and sister's murders, Eugenia, who was just 21 at the time, immediately traveled to Germany and began the process of formally adopting her niece. According to the most up-to-date sources we could find, the two of them have since gone back to Ukraine. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.